for in the excess of wretchedness the sufferers always imagine that their part of the calamity is the bitterest, as, when enduring intense pain, we would exchange the particular torture we writhe under for any other which should visit a different part of the frame. They listened to the account the immigrants gave of their motives for leaving their native land, with the shrug almost of disdain. "Return," they said, "return to your island, whose sea breezes and division from the continent give some promise of health. If pestilence among you has slain its hundreds, with us it has slain its thousands. Are you not even now more numerous than we are? A year ago you would have found only the sick burying the dead. Now we are happier, for the pang of struggle has passed away, and the few you find here are patiently waiting the final blow. But you, who are not content to die, breathe no longer the air of France, or soon you'll only be a part of her soil." Thus, by menaces of the sword, they would have driven back those who had escaped from fire. But the peril left behind was deemed imminent by my countrymen, that before them doubtful and distant, and soon other feelings arose to obliterate fear, or to replace it by passions that ought to have had no place among a brotherhood of unhappy survivors of the expiring world. The more numerous divisions of immigrants which arrived first at Paris assumed a superiority of rank and power. The second party asserted their independence. A third was formed by a sectarian, a self-erected prophet, who, while he attributed all power and rule to God, strove to get the real command of his comrades into his own hands. This third division consisted of fewest individuals, but their purpose was more one, their obedience to their leader more entire, their fortitude and courage more unyielding and active. During the whole progress of the plague, the teachers of religion were in possession of great power, a power of good if rightly directed, or of incalculable mischief if fanaticism or intolerance guided their efforts. In the present instance, a worse feeling than either of these actuated the leader. He was an impostor in the most determined sense of the term, a man who had in early life lost, through the indulgence of vicious propensities, all sense of rectitude or self-esteem, and who, when ambition was awakened in him, gave himself up to its influence, unbridled by any scruple. His father had been a Methodist preacher, an enthusiastic man with simple intentions, but whose pernicious doctrines of election and special grace had contributed to destroy all conscientious feeling in his son. During the progress of the pestilence, he had entered upon various schemes by which to acquire adherents and power. Adrian had discovered and defeated these attempts, but Adrian was absent. The wolf assumed the shepherd's garb, and the flock admitted the deception. He had formed a party during the few weeks he had been in Paris, who zealously propagated the creed of his divine mission, and believed that safety and salvation were to be afforded only to those who put their trust in him. When once the spirit of dissension had arisen, the most frivolous causes gave it activity. The first party, on arriving at Paris, had taken possession of the Tuileries. Chance and friendly feeling had induced the second to lodge near them. A contest arose concerning the distribution of the pillage. The chiefs of the first division demanded that the whole should be placed at their disposal. With this assumption the opposite party refused to comply. When next the latter went to forage, the gates of Paris were shut on them. After overcoming this difficulty, they marched in a body to the Tuileries. They found that their enemies had been already expelled thence by the elect, as the fanatical party designated themselves, who refused to admit any into the palace who did not first abjure obedience to all except God, and his delegate on earth, their chief. Such was the beginning of the strife, which at length proceeded so far that the three divisions, armed, met in the Place Vendôme, each resolved to subdue by force the resistance of its adversaries. They assembled, their muskets were loaded, and even pointed at the breasts of their so-called enemies. One word had been sufficient, and there the last of mankind would have burthened their souls with the crime of murder, and dipped their hands in each other's blood. A sense of shame, a recollection that not only their cause, but the existence of the whole human race was at stake, entered the breast of the leader of the more numerous party. He was aware that if the ranks were thinned, No other recruits could fill them up; that each man was a priceless gem and a kingly crown, which if destroyed, the earth's deep entrails could yield no paragon. He was a young man, and had been hurried on by presumption, on the notion of his high rank and superiority to all other pretenders. Now he repented his work. He felt that all the blood about to be shed would be on his head. With sudden impulse, therefore, he spurred his horse between the bands, and having fixed a white handkerchief on the point of his uplifted sword, thus demanded parley. The opposite leaders obeyed the signal. He spoke with warmth. He reminded them of the oath all the chiefs had taken to submit to the Lord Protector. He declared their present meeting to be an act of treason and mutiny. He allowed that he had been hurried away by passion, but that a cooler moment had arrived, and he proposed that each party should send deputies to the Earl of Windsor, inviting his interference and offering submission to his decision. His offer was accepted so far that each leader consented to command a retreat, and moreover agreed that after the approbation of their several parties had been consulted, they should meet that night on some neutral spot to ratify the truce. At the meeting of the chiefs, this plan was finally concluded upon. The leader of the fanatics indeed refused to admit the arbitration of Adrian. He sent ambassadors rather than deputies to assert his claim, not plead his cause. The truce was to continue until the 1st of February, when the bands were again to assemble on the Place Vendôme. It was of the utmost consequence, therefore, that Adrian should arrive in Paris by that day, since an hair might turn the scale, and peace, scared away by intestine broils, might only return to watch by the silent dead. It was now the 28th of January. Every vessel stationed near Dover had been beaten to pieces and destroyed by the furious storms I have commemorated. Our journey, however, would admit of no delay. That very night Adrian and I and 12 others, either friends or attendants, put off from the English shore in the boat that had brought over the deputies. We all took our turn at the oar, and the immediate occasion of our departure affording us abundant matter for conjecture and discourse, prevented the feeling that we left our native country, depopulate England, for the last time, to enter deeply into the minds of the greater part of our number. It was a serene starlight night, and the dark line of the English coast continued for some time visible at intervals, as we rose on the broad back of the waves. I exerted myself with my long oar to give swift impulse to our skiff, and while the waters splashed with melancholy sound against its sides, I looked with sad affection on this last glimpse of sea-girt England, and strained my eyes not too soon to lose sight of the castellated cliff, which rose to protect the land of heroism and beauty from the inroads of ocean, that, turbulent as I had lately seen it, required such cyclopean walls for its repulsion. A solitary seagull winged its flight over our heads, to seek its nest in a cleft of the precipice. Yes, thou shalt revisit the land of thy birth, I thought, as I looked invidiously on the airy voyager, but we shall never more. Tomb of Idris, farewell. Grave in which my heart lies sepultured, farewell for ever. We were 12 hours at sea, and the heavy swell obliged us to exert all our strength. At length, by mere dint of rowing, we reached the French coast. The stars faded, and the grey morning cast a dim veil over the silver horns of the waning moon. The sun rose broad and red from the sea as we walked over the sands to Calais. Our first care was to procure horses, and although wearied by our night of watching and toil, some of our party immediately went in quest of these in the wide fields of the unenclosed and now barren plain around Calais. We divided ourselves, like seamen, into watches, and some reposed, while others prepared the morning's repast. Our foragers returned at noon with only 6 horses. On these Adrian and I, and 4 others, proceeded on our journey towards the great city, which its inhabitants had fondly named the capital of the civilized world. Our horses had become, through their long holiday, almost wild, and we crossed the plain round Calais with impetuous speed. From the height near Boulogne, I turned again to look on England. Nature had cast a misty pall over her. Her cliff was hidden. There was spread the watery barrier that divided us, never again to be crossed. She lay on the ocean plain. In the great pool a swan's nest,